Good morning, everyone. I hope everyone had a great break. And thank you for joining us for our quick session on understanding Secure 2.0 and how it affects plan sponsors. My name is Shawn Huxley. I'm a partner here at AAFCPAs in our Employee Benefit Plan Group.
And I'm Dave Villani. I'm also a partner here at AAFCPAs and a practice leader for our Employee Benefit Plan Group.
So since this is a short session, we're just going to dive right in and talk about the goal of Secure 2.0. Which is basically to provide workers with a greater access to retirement plans. And it's also there to encourage retirement savings, simplify and clarify retirement plan rules. This is a large act. There's 92 provisions in the act. And today we're going to be going over the major ones with you, discuss which provisions are 403B specific, which ones are mandatory or optional. And then we're also going to talk through some suggestions on how to implement these provisions for your plan. So you'll see that the provisions have various effective dates. But the good news is that the plan amendments generally won't need to be made until the end of the first plan year beginning on or after January 1st of 2025. So the main thing to note is that even though the formal amendments can hold off, the plans do need to be operated in accordance with the effective dates of the provisions. So there are four provisions that are specific to 403B plans that I wanted to go over with you today. The first relates to the hardship distributions that are taken from a plan. So previously there were different rules that applied to 401ks versus 403Bs. So now the rules are the same for both types of plans for hardship distributions. In 403B plans, you can now receive hardship distributions from their salary deferral contributions, their QNEX, their QMAX, and also the earnings on those types of contributions. And that's even if the funds are in an annuity or a custodial account, which we see a lot in 403Bs. So it just gives you more flexibility on where you can take hardship distributions from. In addition, previously, if you wanted to take a hardship distribution, you had to exhaust all efforts in taking money out of the plan in different means. So that meant you had to take as many loans as the plan allowed for. Now you no longer need to take those types of loans. You can just go straight ahead and take a hardship distribution. The second 403B area, it relates to how long-term part-time employees are treated in plans. So in the first Secure Act back in 2019, this rule was created, but it only applied to 401ks. So Secure 2.0 makes it applicable for 403Bs now. So under the Act, the long-term part-time employees who were not eligible to participate in the plan previously are now allowed to. This relates to those employees who were excluded due to that 20-hour per week rule. Now these employees would be eligible if they worked 500 hours or more in 2 consecutive 12-month periods. And even though this provision isn't effective until 2025, plan sponsors are going to need to start tracking hours for all long-term part-time employees starting this year.
And Shawn, I think a key point here is that this may be the heaviest lift for most of the not-for-profit organizations. Like you mentioned, the effective date's not till 2025, but they've got to start tracking hours in 2023 and 2024, which means you've got to look at those part-time employees, looking at payroll reports and hours reports now to determine if they're going to meet that eligibility criteria in 2025. So there's some tracking involved that I think will take a little bit of time.
Yeah, it's a good point, Dave. There's definitely going to be some administrative things that need to happen behind the scenes in tracking those types of employees. So the third provision we wanted to talk about is quick for 403Bs is that they're now allowed to invest in collective investment trusts. So if your provider has that type of investment in their lineup, you can now invest in those types of investments. And then the last one relates to 403Bs is that they are now allowed to join a MEP or a PEP. And just to give you a little background on what those are, a MEP and a PEP is when multiple organizations who are unrelated can join into one plan. And the reason they made this allowed is that the thought was if you have a group of smaller plans that have high plan expenses, not great investment lineup, if those plans join together and make one large plan, there could be cost savings to both the plan sponsors and also better expense structure for the plan participants. In addition, with a larger asset balance in the plan, the plan might be able to offer a more favorable investment lineup, which is going to be a great benefit for those participants. So the next provisions I'm going to be covering are the mandatory provisions, and these apply to all types of plans. And a big provision that they put together is the automatic enrollment, and that's going to be applicable now. So it's for any plans established after the date of enactment, which would be December 29th of 2022. So under this provision, any new plans would have to have an automatic enrollment provision included in it. And what that means is that once an employee is eligible, they'd have to be auto-enrolled in the plan with a minimum deferral of 3% and a max deferral of 10%. In addition, they'd have to, in addition to being auto-enrolled, they'd also have to have an auto escalation where your deferral percentage will have to increase 1% per year up to at least 10%. And then if you're a safe harbor plan, the cap on that auto escalation would increase to 15%. Included in this auto enroll is that there needs to be a 90-day opt-out included. And what that means is that if a participant's auto enrolled and they didn't want to be, then they have the ability within 90 days to withdraw those funds without penalty. And then the last part of the auto enroll provision is that the plan must have a qualified default investment alternative. So what that means is, again, if the participant doesn't go in and specifically elect an investment, the plan has to have a default investment selected so that when those funds are withheld from their paycheck, it can actually be deposited into an investment so that that participant can have earnings on those investments. Now, there are some exceptions to this rule for church plans, governmental plans, employers with 10 or fewer employees, and also new businesses that have not been around for 3 years. The next provision impacts plans that allow catch-up contributions, which are additional contributions made if you're age 50 or older that are in addition to the IRS limits. So starting in 2024, if an employee has income greater than $145,000 in their previous year, then their catch-up contributions for this year would need to be after-tax Roth contributions. So they can no longer be pre-tax deferrals. And just to note that 145,000, that number would be indexed annually.
Shawn, one note I want to add there is, from an organizational standpoint and from an administration standpoint, payroll coding is what's going to be key here. So if you have an employee that is over the age of 50, they're going to be making these contributions, catch-up contributions. You've got to determine whether or not they're eligible for pre-tax versus Roth post-tax contributions, and making sure you've coded those contributions, what's being withheld from their paycheck, correctly in the payroll system. So there's going to need to be some coordination between, what's the plan provision, what's in the payroll system for coding for those contributions, and in making sure that it's collaborating with the record keeper to make sure that the sources of those contributions go into the right bucket in the employee's account, in the retirement account with the record keeper.
Exactly. And then next up, as far as some of the mandatory ones, is that the RMDs that we talked about, the ages are increasing. So in the past few years, you've seen that it's been increasing from 70.5 to 72. This year in 2023, the RMD age is increased to 73. And then down the road in 2033, the age is going to be increased to 75. And then the last mandatory provision I wanted to cover today it's the first day of the month requirement for governmental plans. So previously, before this change, participants in a governmental 457B plan were required to make deferral elections and request any changes in the deferral rate before the beginning of the month that they were actually being paid. Now these participants can change their deferral elections at any time prior to when their compensation is earned. And this is just to allow more flexibility for the participants so they can make real-time changes to their deferral elections. So after going through that and the major provisions, I want to pass it off to Dave to go through the optionals and also what the act means for you.
Yeah, thanks, Shawn. We did get one question that came in, which I'll address now, and that is the definition of a long-term part-time employee. So Secure 2.0 defined that as working 500 hours per year over a 2-year period. So that's measured for 2023 and 2024. So if you have an employee that worked 500 or more hours in 2023 and 500 or more hours in 2024, they will now be eligible for your retirement plan in 2025. Shawn talked about the mandatory items that you must implement or have effective for your retirement plan, the Secure 2.0. there's a number of optional provisions, which we're going to cover now. Under Secure 2.0, there was over 90 provisions that they made available, either mandatory or optional. I think some of these are pretty helpful or useful depending on your organization and the demographics of your employee base. So we'll cover some of these now. Again, they're optional provisions, but items you might want to evaluate and consider. And I would certainly feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions, or certainly work with your service providers, your investment advisor, TPA, and record keeper for any of these items. So the first is the increased cash outs. The current requirement for your plan is if you have an employee who has terminated employment, they've left their retirement account balance with your record keeper. If it's typically less than $5,000, you can force that participant to take a distribution out of the plan. You can give them up to $5,000, distribute it, treat it as a taxable distribution, and force them out of your plan. This would, for lack of a better term, encourage them to move their money into a consolidated retirement plan with whoever their current employer is, or put it into an IRA. So under the new plan, under the new provisions, you have the option to increase that amount up to $7,000. So it was previously up to $5,000. You can increase it up to $7,000. The benefit to the organization is that you can reduce the participant count and really reduce some of the administration within your retirement plan. If you can get those people who no longer work for you, no longer making contribution, get their account out of your retirement plan, and it helps simplify things. The second is self-certification for hardships. So there's always been hardship provisions available under retirement plans. The Secure 2.0 was trying to increase or have a focus on financial wellness for employees. So to make it less prohibitive or creating roadblocks if you have small unforeseen emergencies. So if you have something up to $1,000, you're being evicted, you have a medical expense that you need to pay, they want to be able to get you the money that you need out of your retirement account without making it too prohibitive. So you can create a provision to have them self-certify. They would do that all directly with their record keeper. And then the other is penalty-free emergency savings and withdrawal accounts. That's effective in 2024. Again, this would allow employees to deposit up to $2,500 into a emergency savings account. Generally speaking, there's a huge shortfall in employee saving, not just for retirement, but also for any sort of emergencies. And so they've made this option available as well. Sorry, before we launch the poll, I think we missed one of the other optional provisions. And that is, Shawn talked a little bit about employees that are over the age of 50 having additional catch-up contributions. The key here is there's additional provisions for those employees that are over 60. So from 60 to 63, there's some additional contributions that they can make to help them save for retirement. The other key item, and this was a big one that was added to Secure 2.0, it's optional, is student loan matching contributions. So if your population of employees, you have folks that are working paycheck to paycheck, they aren't contributing employee deferrals to the retirement plan, which means they're also not receiving an employer matching contribution. An optional provision you could put in place is that if employees are paying money to repay their student loan, that can be matched. So the employer could put in contribution into a retirement account for them if they're repaying their student loan.
And this
and
could be,
optional,
this is.
Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to say this is a very sought after provision, because of the student loan debt crisis. So if you're looking to implement it, it is going to be difficult to administer.
Yeah. The last optional provision is really the option to be able to convert employer matching and non-elective contributions to Roth. Should an employee want to make that tax-free upon retirement, they can pay the tax now and convert their employer contributions to Roth contributions as well. I think we can launch the poll now if possible. Okay. So the poll is, would it be helpful to review the impact of Secure 2.0 on your retirement plan with AAFCPAs? I would just remind everyone that, should you have questions on Secure 2.0 and it's something that we can be assistance with, Shawn and I are happy to take a call with you and walk through any of these provisions, both mandatory and optional, to see if they fit, what you're trying to do and how you're trying to help your employees to save for retirement. So takeaways from our brief segment here is that some of these provisions are mandatory. Making sure you're looking at the timeline and what's the effective date for those mandatory provisions. There are some optional provisions. You should evaluate those with your service providers and make sure you're putting those in place by those dates that are required. Also making sure you're reviewing your retirement plan document, looking at the adoption agreement, and really making sure you're coordinating with your service providers. You've got payroll involved, you've got a record keeper involved, maybe an advisor or a TPA. And so there needs to be coordination to make sure that everything matches up, your plan document, your payroll, your record keeper, to ensure you're compliant and treating these provisions correctly. We did get a couple questions. I don't know if we have enough time to cover them now, but certainly we will be available in a session later today, and we could probably cover those then to make sure we stay on track. With that, thank you very much, and we'll look forward to the next session.